Alpine divorce is a phrase that I keep seeing everywhere. It's when a couple goes on a hike and one of them abandons the other and leaves them for dead. There are way too many stories that fall into the Alpine divorce category, but today I want to tell you about two very twisty ones. And as always, I'm Kaylin. This is Heart Starts Pounding. We are in the Rogue Detecting Society headquarters. I upload every week, so if you're a fan of mysterious disappearances, true crime that keeps you up at night, or things like the true stories behind urban legends, you are in the right place. You are just like me, and make sure you're subscribed. It's when your heart starts pounding. At 5:54 p.m. on September 29th, 2012, a 911 dispatcher in Colorado got the following call.
911, what's the address, the emergency?
Hello, my name is Arielle Konig. I'm in the Rocky Mountain National Park.
Okay.
I need an Alpine mountain rescue team immediately.
58-year-old Gerhardt Henthorn told the dispatcher that his wife had fallen and needed to be rescued. He said that they had been hiking off trail on Deer Mountain, taking photos from an overlook, and she had stepped back and lost her footing. She was now at the bottom of a cliff and he needed help fast. The dispatcher starts asking him a couple questions, just trying to get a better understanding of the situation. And for a man that just watched his wife fall off of a cliff, he seems rather measured.
My wife had fallen from a rock on the north summit of Deer Mountain, on the Deer Mountain Trail, when she's in really critical condition. She's had a bad fall.
How far did she fall, sir?
30 feet.
He describes how far his wife fell, like he's telling the dispatcher how far he can throw a football. And then, less than 4 minutes into the call, while the dispatcher is still asking questions, he tells them that the battery on his phone is running low and he just disconnects the call. Now, the nearest ranger station was miles away from where the couple was. The trail that they were on was off the marked path. The sun was now going down over the Rockies. The temperature was dropping fast. And somewhere at the bottom of a cliff in one of the most remote corners of Rocky Mountain National Park, a woman named Toni Henthorn lay injured, or worse. Rescuers were immediately dispatched and tried to save the woman, but it was not going to be easy to get to where she was. See, Deer Mountain sits in the southern reaches of Rocky Mountain National Park, just outside of Estes Park, Colorado. The Deer Mountain Trail winds upward through strands of lodgepole and limber pine. It's very beautiful. The summit tops out at just over 10,000 feet. On a clear afternoon, the views reach out across the Front Range in every direction. Mountains stacked behind mountains all the way to the horizon. But Harold and Toni Henthorn were not at the summit. They had left the marked trail behind and scrambled down to an off-trail ledge, this remote rocky overlook roughly 2.5 miles from the trailhead, in a section of the park that most visitors never see. And this detail stuck out to the rescuers as they made their way towards Toni. This was not a place you would find on the main trail map. It wasn't even really somewhere you would wander into by accident. It was out of the way, and that's putting it lightly. Rangers reached the scene just before 8 o'clock that night, 3 hours after she had fallen, and the drop from that ledge was really steep. It was more than 100 feet of exposed rock face, likely closer to 130 feet. And when they reached Toni at the base, unfortunately, it was already too late. Toni was just 50 years old, a Mississippi girl born and raised in Jackson. She had graduated magna cum laude from the University of Mississippi's medical school. She built a career as a nationally recognized ophthalmologist and had served as the team ophthalmologist for the Colorado Avalanche. She came from this really close-knit family with roots in Mississippi's petroleum industry, and she had a 7-year-old daughter at home. Toni was this amazing and accomplished woman, but there was another thing about her that was going to stand out as being incredibly strange to the investigators. Toni had 3 surgeries on her knee. She was not by any measure an avid hiker, so what was she doing at the bottom of such a rugged, out-of-the-way area? Now, her husband Harold's account of what happened that day was pretty consistent. He told it to the first ranger who reached him that evening. He said that the couple had this beautiful hike. They found a lovely off-trail spot for a picnic lunch, this little scenic overlook with a view out over the park. After they had their meal, Toni stood up to take a photograph. She stepped back, She lost her footing on the uneven rock, and before he could even register what was happening, she had already fallen off the side. And he said that he was performing CPR on her the entire time, doing everything he could until the 911 call connected to the dispatcher. Now, investigators took his story down and they looked at the area where Toni had landed, and they noticed 3 odd things about the area. The first was Toni's camera, the one that she was using to take a photo when she fell. It was lying really close to her body. And to the investigators, that just didn't look right. Now, if she had fallen over 100 feet while she was holding this camera, the ranger expected that it would have been flung out into the rock field somewhere. So why was it so close to her as if it had been placed there? There was also the fact that her wedding ring was still on her finger, but the diamond was missing. It was never recovered from the crime scene. And the third thing was that Toni had been wearing lipstick when she fell. Now, maybe that's not strange. Sure, it's a hike, but some people like to dress up no matter the occasion. The thing that was weird about her lipstick, though, is that it wasn't smudged. Harold had told the investigators that he was doing mouth-to-mouth on Toni, yet none of her lipstick was outside of her lip line or on his face. So the next thing the investigators wanted to do was just take a look at the vehicle that Toni and Harold had arrived in that day. So Harold led him over to where he had parked, and one of the rangers popped open a door and started rummaging through the things that Harold had in this car. And there was something that caught his eye. There was this map that Harold had of Rocky Mountain National Park, and it only had one marking on the entire map, and it was an X right at the spot where Toni had fallen. The ranger looked at Harold and then looked back at the map and knew in his gut that something was deeply wrong with Harold's story. While Toni's body was sent off to be examined by a coroner, Harold was released and returned home. He had to tell his 7-year-old daughter about the death of her mother, but he phrased it really strangely. He told the girl that, quote, Mommy had lost consciousness forever and that she shouldn't cry because people were going to be watching their family. He also started controlling her behavior in all these really concerning ways. He would make her ask permission to even leave her room for a moment, and he kept a baby monitor in there at all times. Like, he just really wanted to know where she was at any given moment. And then there was also Toni's family. They reached out to Harold for more information on what happened that day. Her brother, Barry, was actually a cardiologist. It made sense that he wanted to know more about the circumstances surrounding Toni's death, because what if Toni had suffered some sort of heart attack while she was on the mountain? But every time Harold would tell Toni's family about what happened, the details would change. And Toni's family felt like they were getting 4 or 5 different versions of the story, and now they were having trouble keeping track of what happened. And they became even more suspicious when Harold not only filed a claim for Toni's $4.5 million life insurance policy, but he immediately sent $500,000 to his brother, like he was trying to move the money around really fast, maybe to hide some of it. With each passing day, Toni's family was growing more and more suspicious that Harold was hiding something. And they weren't the only ones. Investigators were silently looking into Toni's death more because they agreed something was very weird about Harold and his story. And what they found when they started digging around a little bit more was pretty shocking. So what followed next was a deeper investigation, and where Toni died was about to play a huge role in how the investigation would go. Because Toni Henthorn didn't just die in a national park, she died in a federal jurisdiction, and that mattered a lot. So the National Park Service has its own investigative branch, a small corps of federal agents responsible for crimes across the entire national park system. There were roughly 33 agents nationwide at the time. When a death in Rocky Mountain National Park looked like it might be something other than an accident, those were the agents that got involved. So NPS Special Agent Beth Schott started working on the case. And Beth was this incredible, detail-oriented investigator. She hiked Deer Mountain more than 15 times during her investigation. She walked the trail at every hour in every type of weather, mapping every angle just to see if she could find something that wasn't there before. FBI Special Agent Johnny Grusing also worked the case alongside her. Beth was definitely not the type to leave any stone unturned, literally or figuratively. And the first thing that she wanted to look at was Harold's phone records. And it turns out that during the window Harold said he was down at the base of that cliff performing CPR on his wife, that's when his phone was lighting up with activity. Somehow, during the time that he said he was doing chest compressions, He had also made 22 phone calls and exchanged 98 text messages. 98, including at least 16 messages to a friend asking if he could drive to pick Harold up from Estes Park and recommending that the friend take this specific route. He also sent a text to Toni's brother, Barry, the cardiologist, at 6:16 p.m. That was 20 minutes after he made the 911 call. And the text just said, "She's gone." No context. But by the time he eventually called Barry, he had already been on the phone with at least a dozen other people, and most of those calls happened before he had even called 911. And the Larimer County coroner would later testify that based on Toni's injuries and the evidence that was found at the scene, she had almost certainly died within 20 to 60 minutes of the fall, and that certainly would have been before the first 911 call went out at 5:54 p.m. Special Agent Schott knew that Harold's phone was going to hold more information than just these phone calls and texts. It also had his location. And if you thought things already looked bad for him, they're about to look a whole lot worse. Harold's GPS data placed him inside of Rocky Mountain National Park at least 8 or 9 times in the 6 weeks before Toni's death. Every single time he had gone by himself, and when investigators confronted him about this, he said that he had only been there once, even though they were looking at the data and they knew that that was a lie. Then there was also a photograph recovered from Harold's phone. It was taken that afternoon at the cliff, and it showed Harold standing at the very edge of the cliff, holding a pine branch, angled back towards the spot where Toni was standing. Special Agent Schott saw that photo and immediately could tell what it was. I mean, it looked like Harold was trying to lure Toni towards him to stand where he was standing, right at the cliff's edge. And then Agent Schott got a call from the coroner. It was confirmed. There was no physical evidence that any CPR was done on Toni. They would have expected to see cracked ribs or bruises, but no, there was nothing. For as damning as all of this information I just shared with you was, though, the most startling evidence hadn't even been discovered yet. See, after Toni's death had been reported on and picked up by news publications, investigators started receiving letters. 17 of them, actually. All of them were anonymous, and they weren't just sent to the investigators. They were also sent to Toni's family and to Brian Moss, who is an investigative reporter at KCNC, the CBS Denver affiliate. All of these letters had the same message. These letters said that this isn't the first one of Harold's wives to die under strange circumstances. Harold had been married once before to a woman named Sandra Lynn Henthorn. Everyone called her Lynn. She had died on May 6th, 1995 at just 37 years old. And the official story, the one that Harold had told authorities when they arrived on the scene, was that she and Harold had been out on a rural stretch of Highway 67 west of Sedalia, Colorado, when their car allegedly slipped off a jack while they were changing a tire by the side of the road. Lynn wound up pinned beneath the vehicle, and her official cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. The only witness to this entire horrible event was Harold. And even still, Douglas County authorities had closed the case as an accident in less than a week. And when these letters started being publicized, it really got Toni's family thinking, because they knew about another event that had happened to Toni the previous year in late August of 2011. That was 14 months before Toni would die on Deer Mountain. And it made them rethink everything. So Harold and Toni were at their vacation cabin in Grand Lake, Colorado. Harold was working on the deck one night at 10 p.m. for some reason when he called out to Toni to come help him with something. The exact details of what happened are a little murky, but we know that Toni walked outside and a heavy structural beam came down onto her head. Now, the reason that details are murky is because Harold had at least 3 different versions of what happened. He told the ER doctor that the beam had fallen off the deck, but he told a friend that it had slipped from his hands while he was out on a ladder. Regardless, it had struck her and it fractured the vertebrae in her neck. But she survived. Later on, she would tell her mother, Yvonne, that if I hadn't bent down after I walked outside, that beam would have killed me. And just like in Lynn's case, the beam incident had been ruled an accident and no charges were ever filed. But Toni's family always thought that incident was so strange. It just didn't add up. And they didn't even know about the life insurance policies. Harold had taken out 3 life insurance policies on Toni. They were all stacked. They were all managed by him. And apparently, she didn't know about any of them. And maybe I'm naive, but I didn't know that you could do that. Take out life insurance policies on a spouse without their knowledge. That feels like a huge oversight. The total of all these life insurance policies came out to roughly $4.5 million, which is what Harold collected. And initially in the investigation, investigators had asked Harold how much life insurance he carried on Toni. He only said that there was one policy, and it was just worth $1.5 million. There was also the educational annuity. Toni's parents had set aside $205,000 specifically to fund their granddaughter's education. And Harold had quietly redirected it and changed the beneficiary to himself. And the whole time I'm reading about all of this, I kept asking myself, what did this guy do for a job? Because why is he stealing all of the money of everyone around him? Doesn't he have his own money that he can do whatever he wants with? Well, let me tell you what I found. Harold said that his profession was being a certified fundraiser. Basically, he said that he was a consultant to major churches and nonprofit organizations across the country. He had all of these business cards that he had made up. He had this professional title he used. He had a lot of goodwill from Christian philanthropic circles that he said that he worked with. And Toni believed him. I mean, she had no reason not to. Her family believed him, but Beth Schott didn't believe him. So she went and she pulled Harold's tax returns, and she saw that he had zero reported income from 2005 through 2011. Zero income. The organization whose certification appeared on his business cards had no record of him being a member. Harold hadn't had a verifiable job since 1992. He had been exclusively living off of his wives, which is a fine thing to do, but when you're lying about it and you're stealing all of their money, that's where I draw the line. And the stealing from women extended far beyond his own circle. There was also Grace Reichel, who was the sister of Harold's first wife, the one who died under the car. Sometime in 2009 or 2010, Harold had taken out a $400,000 life insurance policy on Grace and named himself the sole beneficiary. Again, how is this a legal thing that people can do? Grace had believed that the policy was for her daughters. She found out the truth after Harold was arrested, though. She would later tell ABC 2020 that she believed she was meant to be one of Harold's victims. Harold had found both of his wives through Christian dating networks, spaces where he was presenting himself as being devout and professionally accomplished, and was probably not being asked to provide any documentation to prove himself. These women were taking him at face value for the man he was presenting himself as, which is terrifying because I think that's something we all do. Harold was arrested in November 2014 at 58 years old. A federal grand jury had indicted him for first-degree murder. The trial opened on September 8th, 2015, and the first thing to really come up in the trial was the location. It seemed that this remote off-trail ledge was the perfect place to murder someone, as one of the prosecutors said. The defense called no witnesses during the trial. Harold did not testify. The jury deliberated for roughly 10 hours, and on September 21st, 2015, they returned a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Harold was sentenced on December 8th, mandatory life without the possibility of parole. He did have something to say before the sentence was handed down, though. At the end of all of that, he said, quote, "Toni was a remarkable woman. I loved her with all my heart. I did not kill Toni or anyone else." And he spent a lot of time trying to get out of jail. He petitioned the Supreme Court actually in 2018, and they declined to see his case. He filed post-conviction motions alleging ineffective counsel. Those were rejected in 2022. By 2023, every avenue of appeal was closed for him, and now he is currently serving life without parole in a federal facility in Indiana. Harold was the worst of the worst. I think that's pretty obvious. But I do want to take a second to focus on the women in his life. His daughter no longer speaks to him. In a February 2025 interview, she referred to him only as Mr. Henthorn. Toni's mom was in the Denver courtroom when the verdict came in. A juror hugged her afterwards, and she said to a reporter, quote, "Believe it or not, I forgive him for doing it. I feel for him and his family." And then there's his first wife, Lynn. Lynn's death investigation was actually reopened in October of 2012, 17 years after the fact, but less than a month after Toni's death. The details had been filed away without a second look, and suddenly everything looked pretty different. There was a shoe print on the side of the vehicle, like there had maybe been a struggle. There were 2 jacks at the scene. One of them was a boat jack propped on a cinder block, which is not a standard configuration for changing a tire on the side of the road. There was also a passing motorist named Patricia who had stopped to help and later told investigators that Harold had not wanted to cover Lynn's body with his jacket while they waited. Harold gave 5 different accounts of the timeline that evening. In December of 2014, Lynn's death certificate was changed from accident to undetermined, and that might be the only justice that she ever gets to see in her case, but Harold will spend the rest of his life in jail. So maybe you've heard the viral phrase that gets passed around when talking about these kinds of stories, Alpine Divorce. Alpine Divorce is a term derived from an 1893 short story of the same name written by Robert Barr. The story revolves around a husband who plans to end his marriage by pushing his wife off a cliff while hiking in the Swiss Alps. However, when the couple reaches the cliff's edge, Mrs. Bodeman reveals that she's anticipated this plan all along, and she's told her friends to watch out for him, hotel staff, and she also arranged for witnesses to follow them. And then she throws herself over the wall, framing her husband for her own death. The story ends with John standing alone as 2 men arrive, realizing that the truth will never be believed. It's kind of ironic that in the actual story that started the phrase, there's a big question over who is actually guilty. And that kind of brings me to my next story. It's a story about a couple that goes on a hike and only one of them makes it down safely. And it's also about the questions that arise as to what really happened up on that mountain. So just like in the last story, this one also begins on a mountain trail, not on most maps. The Palipuka Trail in Hawaii, which is behind the bus parking area at the Nu'uanu Pali Lookout on the windward side of Oahu. It's a spot on the Pali Highway where tourists stop to take photos of the mountains. There are signs all over the place warning you to not stand too close to the edge. The trail itself is unmarked. The state's Department of Land and Natural Resources discourage people from hiking it. There's every reason not to go, but people go anyways. The views are very beautiful. You can see Oahu while you're up on the cliff's edge. However, the drop on either side of that ridge as you're looking out at that beautiful view is several hundred feet. And in some places, it's actually more. Hikers have died on this trail. On the morning of March 24th, 2025, Amanda Morris and Sarah Bushbaum were making their way up that trail. Both were registered nurses there for a hike. The trade winds were blowing, the forest pressing around the narrow path. And then, somewhere up ahead of them on the ridge, they heard a woman screaming. It was really soft at first, but eventually they could start hearing words taking shape. "Please help me. He's trying to kill me." They both rushed towards the screams, and Sarah Bushbaum pulled out her phone and made the following 911 call.
Hi, someone's currently being attacked on the top of Palipuka. Where? There's a man trying to kill her. She's blood all over her face.
The 2 nurses came around a bend in the trail and found that there was a woman on the ground. Her face and her scalp were covered in blood. She was conscious, and she was also alone. Whoever she was screaming about was gone. Amanda and Sarah both sprung into action using their expertise as nurses. They ran to her while they were still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, and they helped her get upright. Then they held onto her and began their descent back down towards the lookout parking lot. They were supporting her on either side. Honolulu police responded really fast to the call. Body camera footage captured the woman in the parking lot, conscious, standing with her face crusted in blood from the wounds that were on her scalp. And they asked her what her name was. And she responded, "I'm Arielle Konig." She had been hiking with her husband, Gerhardt Konig. And what followed over the next 6+ hours was one of the largest manhunts in recent Honolulu history. The police department's domestic violence detail, their strategic enforcement unit, crime reduction units, the Special Services Division, the Hawaiian Department of Land and Natural Resources, and the Honolulu Fire Department all deployed to look for Arielle's husband. Around 6 o'clock that evening, it was actually an off-duty police officer who had spotted a man emerging from the brush onto Pali Drive. There was blood all over his shirt. The man saw the officer and turned around and ran back into the brush, but the officer was able to catch up to him and detain him. Gerhardt Konig was 46 years old at the time of his arrest. He had been born in South Africa, raised in San Diego after his family immigrated when he was 14. He went on to medical school and an anesthesiology residency at the University of Pittsburgh. He eventually became an assistant professor there in anesthesiology and bioengineering. He worked at UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, for years before his family relocated. In 2023, they moved to Maui, where Gerhardt was contracted to provide anesthesiology services at Maui Health. Now, an anesthesiologist is someone you have to be able to trust completely because you're at your most vulnerable when you're in the room with them. It's someone who controls the line between consciousness and unconsciousness, whose judgment you hand yourself over to completely. And I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't want an anesthesiologist who had tried to kill someone before. Now, Gerhardt had been married once before to a woman named Jessica Patella. That marriage ended in 2014 when she filed for divorce. He had 2 children from that marriage, including an older son named Emil, who was 19 at the time of this incident. His current wife, Arielle, was 36 years old on March 24, 2025, which also happened to be her birthday. Now, Arielle was also an incredibly accomplished woman. She had studied nuclear engineering at Penn State and then spent 11 years at Westinghouse Electric and fuel engineering. In September of 2022, she joined TerraPower as a project manager, working on high-assay, low-enriched uranium supply. Arielle, by any measure, was exceptional at what she did. And she and Gerhardt had met on eHarmony and married in September of 2018. Together, they had 2 young sons born in 2020 and in 2023, and they had relocated from Pittsburgh to Maui, purchasing a home in the foothills above Kahului for $1.5 million. An accomplished doctor, an accomplished engineer, their 2 little boys, a house in paradise. From the outside, they had a perfect life. But as happens in a lot of people's lives, things on the outside were not the same as how they were on the inside of that marriage. In December of 2024, Gerhardt had woken up in the middle of the night and picked up Arielle's phone. He opened her WhatsApp and found that there were messages between her and a colleague at TerraPower. It was an exchange that Gerhardt thought constituted as an emotional affair. He read these messages and thought they were really flirtatious. Arielle and this colleague had this system where they would say the word HALEU, which stood for high-assay low-enriched uranium, as this discreet signal to each other whenever Gerhardt was nearby. The confrontation that followed after Gerhardt found these messages was really ugly. He demanded that Arielle quit her job entirely. He called her all of these names. He bought a recording device to keep tabs on her. He even reached out to her affair partner's wife to tell her about the affair, kind of in an attempt to ruin Arielle's life. But Arielle said that despite all of this, despite how angry he was about the affair, she was willing to do whatever it took to fix their marriage. So they decided they would go into couples counseling. They listened to this audiobook together too about healing after infidelity. And 3 months passed. They were on the mend. They were working together to repair their marriage. And that's when Gerhardt booked their hike in Oahu. Arielle had mentioned 3 days before their departure that she had always wanted to visit Oahu. And Gerhardt made all of the arrangements for this trip. He booked the hotel. He got them this really nice dinner reservation for that night. And that morning, before they left their hotel, Gerhardt had given her a heart-shaped card, and inside it said, "You are the heart of our family. The kids and I hit the jackpot with you. Love always, G." And then they drove out to the hike. Arielle had taken photos that day of the view on Snapchat. She sent those to her family. And then the couple began the Palipuka hike at around 10 in the morning. But the trail was not really what she was expecting for a fun birthday hike. It got really steep really fast. About a quarter of a mile in, the cliff dropped away on one side, leaving the couple completely exposed to the fall below. And she started getting really uncomfortable. She was clinging to tree branches as they were taking selfies. You can actually see her grip in one of the photos, and the drop is visible behind them. And in this photo, you can also see that Gerhardt is wearing a small black backpack. And that's going to be really important. According to Arielle, shortly after they took their last selfie, Gerhardt grabbed her by the upper arms and he told her, "I'm so sick of this. Get back over here." And then he started pushing her towards the edge of the cliff, which was less than 10 feet away at that point. In a panic, she threw herself on the ground and started grabbing at roots and shrubs around her, anything that was rooted into the earth that could hold on to her. But she said that Gerhardt straddled her, and then he reached into that black backpack and pulled out a syringe, and he told her to hold still. Now, she was able to knock that out of his hand. It went flying somewhere on the mountain. But the nightmare wasn't over because he went back in the backpack and pulled out another syringe. Whatever was about to happen, Arielle felt like Gerhardt had clearly planned for it. He put his hand over her mouth and he said something that really sums up the whole Alpine Divorce horror perfectly. He said to her, "Nobody's going to hear you out here. nobody's coming to save you. Arielle was not going down without a fight, though. She bit onto his forearm, she grabbed him, she fought as hard as she could. And at some point, Gerhardt reached down, he picked up a rock that was by them on the trail, and he struck her in the head with it. She estimated that it happened somewhere around 10 times. But from somewhere down below, she could hear the two nurses screaming that they were calling 911. And Gerhardt heard this too, and he froze. Arielle was able to crawl on her hands and knees towards the nurses' voices as Gerhardt fled away. And that was the story that Arielle told investigators as they were wiping the blood from the event off of her face. And the first thing they wanted to go do was find that syringe because they wanted to know what was inside of it, but also they needed to know that it existed, that the version of the story Arielle was telling was actually what happened, despite the fact that she suffered a head injury. So the investigators went back up, they searched the trail, and they didn't find anything. And the nurses who found Arielle said that they didn't see a syringe either. And, they had worked with a lot of syringes inside of the hospital. They knew what they looked like. And yet when they scanned the ground around her, they didn't see anything like that. And that made the investigators wonder if Arielle was potentially embellishing part of the story. But 3 days after the attack, Arielle returned to the family home without Gerhardt, and she was looking through the house when she found a Nike fanny pack in a closet, and inside, she saw Gerhardt's Kaiser Permanente employee ID, multiple empty syringes and needles, and also vials of propofol. Now, propofol is a really powerful intravenous anesthetic that's used in operating rooms. It induces unconsciousness quickly and completely. It also is, for most people, the drug that's associated with the 2009 death of Michael Jackson, whose personal physician administered it to him as a sleep aid. It is kind of notorious for giving you the best nap of your life. Gerhardt was an anesthesiologist. He had unrestricted access to propofol, which he potentially had been stealing from the hospital that he worked at. It looked like he brought it to Oahu in a fanny pack along with the syringes that he would need to administer it. However, no syringes would ever be recovered from the Palipuka Trail. The defense would make that point repeatedly at trial, but Arielle had testified that when she knocked the syringe out of his hand, they were on a cliff's edge. It could have gone anywhere. It was super windy that day. Honolulu police did seize the fanny pack, and that became central evidence at the trial. The trial ran for roughly 3 weeks in March of 2026 before Honolulu Circuit Court Judge Paul Wong. Now, Gerhardt's defense attorney presented this counter-narrative to Arielle's story. They said that this had been an unplanned, unpremeditated scuffle that was precipitated by Arielle pushing Gerhardt first. The rock, they argued, was this heat-of-the-moment response to Arielle screaming at him and striking him, all in regards to this affair that had occurred. Gerhardt also took the stand in his own defense, and he claimed that this was a self-defense thing that he did. He didn't deny that he hit Arielle over the head, but he did say that she was the one that started this. And they really tried to make a big deal about Arielle's credibility. They said that she was unreliable because she had been hiding an affair from Gerhardt for who knows how long. She was clearly capable of lying. And the syringe was never found at the scene. Was she lying about that too? Sure, there was medical gear in her home that was found, but that could have been from anything. Gerhardt was a medical professional, for goodness sake. But the closing argument really cut through all of this. They said, quote, the only thing that got Gerhardt to stop was being caught red-handed, which that was true. He heard those voices coming up the mountain, and that was when he fled. If he was trying to protect himself from Arielle, why did he continue to bash her over the head for so long? And, there were also these calls that he had made to his son. So during the 6-hour manhunt that followed, Gerhardt placed 2 FaceTime calls to his son, Emil. The first was at 10:42 in the morning, 4 minutes after the 911 call was placed. He told Emil that he was not going to make it back to Maui. He said that he had just tried to kill Arielle because she had been cheating on him, said that outright, and that he also planned to jump off the cliff before the police could catch him. The second call was at 11:46 a.m., and Gerhardt asked Emil if he had told anyone. And then he said, quote, I'm going to go before the police catch me. But he wasn't able to before the police officer caught up with him and brought him into custody. On April 8th, 2026 at 2:18 in the afternoon, the jury returned the verdict. They had deliberated for just 8 hours. Gerhardt was found guilty of attempted manslaughter based on extreme mental or emotional disturbance. He was not found guilty of attempted second-degree murder. And this distinction really matters. Attempted second-degree murder would have been life with the possibility of parole. Attempted manslaughter under Hawaii's extreme emotional disturbance provision carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. And a juror spoke to reporters afterwards and said that the jury was not convinced that Gerhardt had specifically intended to kill Arielle on that particular day, but this juror also noted that a head injury is a very deadly part of the body. Gerhardt's sentencing is scheduled for August 13th of 2026. It's coming up as of the airing of this episode, and prosecutors are going to seek that 20-year maximum. Arielle testified on the 1-year anniversary of the day that Gerhardt tried to kill her. She described the scar on her forehead, the patch of scalp where her hair no longer grows. Her 2 sons were 3 and 6 years old at the time of the verdict, and they are now in her custody. She did file for divorce in May of 2025. And as of this recording, Gerhardt is being held while he waits for sentencing. You know, I was trying to write an outro for this episode, but in classic Heart Starts Pounding fashion, there was a huge update on an Alpine Divorce case that happened as I was writing the episode. A bunch of you messaged me about it on Instagram, and so I wanted to take a second here and just explain what's happening. So on June 25th, 2026, a man named David Vandermeer died in police custody after appearing to take his own life. Vandermeer was waiting to go to trial for the 2006 death of his wife. So in 2006, David and his wife Bernadette were on an anniversary trip to Zion National Park when Bernadette fell roughly 1,200 feet to her death from Angel's Landing, which is one of the most dangerous trails in America. And because it's such a dangerous trail, her death was initially ruled an accident. But basically everyone thought that it was incredibly suspicious. Bernadette fell in a place where people don't usually fall. David's story kept changing as to what happened that day. And then it came out that he had raised her life insurance and collected over $500,000 after she died. I mean, this is basically the playbook that we've already gone over in this episode. Years went by, no arrests were ever made. But then, a few years ago, a woman came forward and helped paint a bigger picture of what was happening in the couple's life at around the time of Bernadette's death. See, David was a youth pastor at the time, and he had been grooming a 14-year-old girl, and he told her that they could be together if only his wife were dead. The teen girl was able to put an end to the abuse the night before Bernadette was killed, and now the multiple women he brutalized and their families will never see justice because he took his own life and he's never going to stand trial for what he allegedly did. And that is why it's so important to end this episode with this. If anything in this episode resonated with you, maybe a little bit too much, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233, or you can text START to 88788. That is all I have for you today. Now, I turn it over to you wherever you listen. Feel free to leave comments, questions, theories, thoughts. I love hearing from you guys. I love hearing your stories, your updates, everything. If you've ever been on a hike with someone who just left you behind, because that's another thing that comes up with these Alpine divorces all the time. I was on a hike with my boyfriend and he just took off without me and I was left on the mountain and I got lost. Let me know. You can comment wherever you listen. I will be back next week with another episode. I will see you all then. And if you want to hear more stories of Alpine divorces, I have the High Council tier on Patreon, where every week I do a bonus extra show where I talk a bit more about the episode. I talk about stories that didn't make it in. I give a little bit more context to stories. That all happens with my sibling, Leo. We just kind of chat through the research, talk about some stuff that's been on our mind, the true crime stories that we can't stop thinking about for the week. You can always join us there. And until next time, stay curious. Ooh. Heart Starts Pounding is written and produced by me, Kayla Moore. Our associate producer is Juno Hobbs. Heart Starts Pounding is also produced by Matt Brown. Sound design and mix by Red Rum Creative. Video editing by Creative Step. Special thanks to Travis Dunlap, Grayson Jernigan, the team at WME. Have a heart-pounding story or a case request? Check out heartstartspounding.com.